finally threw out my TV yesterday.
Oh yeah, I was gonna help you with that, but then I never did. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't like ask you anyway. I asked you like theoretically.
Yeah.
Hey,
That's
anyway,
true.
hey, one.
For some reason, I thought you and Tommy had handled it. I don't remember why I thought that, but I thought Tommy had came over and you guys got drunk and smashed it or something.
That's completely product of your imagination. I mean, although it
smashing it with Tommy,
it doesn't sound that far off from possible reality. I don't think I ever said anything close to that.
Yeah, no, I didn't think you guys smashed it, but I did think you guys had carried it outside for some reason when he was over there drinking with you. I don't remember why I thought that. Doesn't matter, though. Nothing matters.
One managed it just fine, actually. Well, actually...
Yeah, she did it by herself, right?
Yeah, she was like, fuck you, Josh, and just carried it over her head.
I believe it.
No, we were like cleaning / sort of rearranging the house like all day yesterday, and she said
to do that,
and she was like, she kept saying the phrase, "I just want to get this thing out of my face," because I was like, well, we can't put it out on the.
Yeah, maybe I think I just forgot. It's easy to forget who's alive and who's dead, you know.
Sure.
Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm alive. To be honest with you.
This is an ongoing theme in the podcast.
Me wondering if I'm alive.
Yeah. I mean, what I was just about to say, I remembered saying before.
I've always wanted to be alive. Truly alive.
I see what you mean. Not in the...
One day I want to be a real boy.
Biological sense.
I want to be a real boy.
Good luck.
It's fucking hard. Maybe I'm too old to be a real boy. Okay, play this stupid video. David Graeber's
calm down,
job
man. Not gonna introduce.
David Graeber's job was bullshit too. You know why? Because no one fucking cares about writing. What has it done for humankind other than document our failures?
He walked out in the gray light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world. The cold, relentless circling of the intestate earth. Darkness implacable. The blind dogs of the sun in their running. The crushing black vacuum of the universe. And somewhere 200 animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it.
And lo, for the earth was empty of form, and void, and darkness was all over the face of the deep, and we said, look at that fucker dance.
Welcome to Heat Death of the Universe, the #1 centre spiritually violent podcast on iTunes. Psychological violence podcasts.
I have a black belt in psychological violence.
Hiya. Hadouken.
Ask my ex-friends.
Your ex-friends.
You can't ask them because they were psychologically violenced to death.
Just a little bit about what's going on here. It's August 23rd, 2021, 11:47 a.m. It's a Monday. Garfield's favorite of the days. And the weather is what I would call suicide-inducing. I don't like the way it looks right now outside.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a week of rain. Predicted rain all week.
Yeah, it's the delayed monsoon of Seoul, South Korea. Did I mention where we're broadcasting from? Now I did.
Right.
So today we're doing a book club again. What is this now? Fourth?
Something like that.
Let's see.
I've never been very good with big numbers.
You're like, one. You're just counting on your hand. Two?
I start to lose track after 2.
Yeah, it gets pretty tricky after then. I think it is the fourth. What was the first one? Oh, so the Empire of Pain, Libra, Nickel and Dimes, then
Scratch
the worst
Beginnings.
book ever, Scratch Beginnings. So it's nice to bounce back into a really excellent book. Today, what are we discussing today, Jason?
We're going to discuss Dave Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs.
Bullshit Jobs. Well, you've read this book before.
Yeah, I had read it a while ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, I guess.
Do
Then I
you,
reread most of it this week, and I feel like I got more from the second reading, or maybe I got the same amount, but it refreshed me a lot.
what do you remember like what led you to the book?
Oh, I had a friend just tell me to read it. No, my old roommate, he was reading it. He's like, "Hey, man, I think you'd really like this book." So I read it too. That's literally what led me to it.
That's cool. I guess I heard of it from you actually. Although I just discovered who David Graeber was. I want to say it was somewhere around the last U.S. presidential election. Yeah, it was through like what I think was like a semi-viral video clip that was being passed around, and I just want to play it really quick for some quick context about I don't know, David Graeber's kind of take on U.S. politics, like in a really broad sense. It's entitled David Graeber on the Extreme Center. Center spelled in the British fashion. I don't know why that bears stating, but it's been stated. So it's not too long. Let's just take a quick listen. David Graeber on the Extreme Center.
The kind of politics we have now, where the left is represented by this kind of Obama-Macron-style centrism, where you're both for the market and for bureaucracy at the same time, is kind of horrible, right? The only possible appeal of that kind of politics is, well, at least they're not Nazis, right? So what they want is the left to be this kind of mishmash of bureaucratic market centrism, and the right to be outright fascist. To set the ball rolling in an actual left direction will make that centrism look like utterly unappealing. In France, sometimes they talk about the extreme center, and I think that's a fitting phrase. It strikes me that what's called the moderates are the most immoderate people possible. And the reason why they're so uncompromising, I think, is because they realize they don't have a lot of positive arguments. They're not really for anything. I mean, somebody like Obama, the reason he worked was because he looked like the kind of guy who would have a vision. He acted like a visionary. He had the intonation. He had the way of standing and looking into the distance like he really believed in something. And it shows you something about just how much visionary politics has been killed. It didn't even seem to occur to people to ask what his vision actually was, right? Because it turns out, insofar as he had a vision, his vision was not to have a vision. You know, he believed in pragmatism and compromise and so forth. And that's what the center has been reduced to. It's become this pure set of performative symbols. And at the same time, you get to feel morally superior, which is ultimately what centrism, what liberal centrism is all about, is the ability to feel better than other people. So there is a kind of a symbiosis whereby the right wing pretend to be stupid, like George Bush II sort of perfected this, like I'll act like a yokel. All of the liberals will make fun of me as an idiot. Everybody who resents the sort of cultural elite for having monopolized all the good jobs will look at them sneering at me and say, yeah, I bet those guys feel the same way about me as they feel about Bush. I'll vote for Bush. Ha ha ha, stick it to him, right? You know, that shtick, Trump is just doing it in a more extreme version of the same thing. Johnson's doing the same thing. You know, you act like an idiot, the people who are the sort of educated elite make fun of you, and it works. Now, who's really the idiot, right? People keep falling for the same stupid trick over and over and over again. There's a symbiotic relationship between these centrists, who are just sort of sneering elitists, and these guys who are the scam artists who pretend to be yokels, who pretend to be idiots, or pretend to be fascists. They're not even real fascists. They're kind of phony fascists. They are trying to set up a situation where those are the only two viable political choices, because they both feed off and complement one another.
Okay. And yeah, there's a in loving memory, because David Graeber died shortly after that interview, I believe, same year at least, 2020. So yeah, I mean, he eloquently says stuff that, I don't know, I feel like at least we try to express on the podcast.
Yeah, I think so
a
too.
lot. And I mean, a lot of people of our ilk already talk about, but I just wanted to play that because that's how I found out who he was. And I like the way he describes that phenomenon. And the videos kind of I'll link to that anyway, because it cuts together some clips of the people he's talking about that makes it land a little better.
I like that he says that the yokel, that's what he used, the yokel image or demeanor is a fucking con.
Yeah.
He's so annoyed by people calling the bad guy politicians idiots, because they're usually not. I mean, I don't like them, but it's also just like underestimating your enemy gets on my nerves.
Yeah. I mean, this is slightly getting away from the main topic, but like I'm a little of two minds on that, because I don't think George Bush or Donald Trump are like intellectuals or anything, but I think they also know very well what they're doing. But I don't think it's like 100% an act either, where like, you know, George W. Bush walks backstage after a speech and is just like speaking in like this perfect, like educated, like,
The thing is, he might be able to. I imagine he went to the best private schools. I know he went to the best private universities.
but he's infamously like a total fail son. Like he's a huge disappointment to his dad. That was like what a lot of people's psychological analysis of him is, that everything he did as president was just trying to impress his dad, including finishing off Saddam Hussein.
I guess everything I do is just me trying to impress my dad.
Is that a fact?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say. Anyway, so Bullshit Jobs. Bullshit Jobs is a very interesting book. It grew out of an essay that David Graeber wrote.
Yeah, you wrote it for The Nation? What was it for The Nation? Was it what?
I forget where it was first published, but it became like kind of instantly a...
Strike. He wrote it for Strike.
Yeah, well, it was something less visible than like The Nation, something more left leaning. But and it's just on this phenomenon of jobs that the person who works them feels are pointless, like as if
Yeah, they feel like it doesn't contribute anything meaningful to society.
and not even in the, but I mean, he refines his definition of what a bullshit job is over the course of like the first chapter, maybe even the second chapter too. And what he ultimately lands on, we should just get right to his definition, is a bullshit job is a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence, even though, as a part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obliged to pretend that this is not the case. So it's something that like the person even doing the job can't like self-delude themselves into thinking is like a justifiable means of receiving pay, basically. Now, but before I read this book and you just told me about it, I didn't know. I sort of assumed I knew what it was going to be about, and what I assumed it was going to be about was what gets distinguished from bullshit jobs as shit jobs. I thought it was going to be all about shit jobs, just basically jobs that like exploit and like don't pay people a living wage. But while reading this book and thinking about it, I realized like, you know, people have already written that book a million times over. But as far as I know, no one has really written about this particular phenomenon of what he calls bullshit jobs.
I'm actually a bit sad that I've never had a truly bullshit job.
Well, because one of the defining features of a bullshit job tends to be, it doesn't have to be, but it, at least in all the examples he's used so far, I should also point out, we read the preface through chapter 4, and there's, so the next episode will be covering 5, 6, and 7. Which is the end, the rest of the book. So we read like half the book, first half of the book. But yeah, one of the defining features tends to be, doesn't have to be, but tends to be that these are like well-paying, high-paying jobs where people do essentially nothing. And, but how even that is harmful on a psychological or what he'll call like a spiritual level to the individual, but then also I feel like what he's going to get into in chapters 5, 6, and 7 is like the wider implications, like social implications, because so far he's covered more of like how it affects individual people, and he uses a lot of like anecdotes from people that after he wrote that essay, he got like a lot of email and like Twitter activity from people like giving their personal sort of testimonies to their bullshit jobs. And he uses a lot of it in the book. And a lot of it is fairly interesting, especially to me, someone who's never had what I would say is frankly the luxury of a bullshit job. I've only had shit jobs.
I've known of people who've had bullshit jobs, but I've never been so lucky in my life. I've mostly worked shit jobs. I don't remember what my current job would be classified as. I wouldn't consider it a shit job. It's just a job.
Yeah. And he also goes in to say that there are, you know, well, he lists 5 main categories of bullshit jobs, but then after that he talks about these sort of other sort of categories that don't really fit, that are sort of like hybrids of several of the other kinds of bullshit jobs, I guess.
I've had some of these, like duct taping, where you're hired to fix something, and like occasionally you actually have to do that, but like 99% of your work you're doing nothing.
Yeah,
that's one of the ones he described. That was my experience with IT when I was briefly doing IT work. Most of the time I was just reading about new video games in a web browser. It was awesome.
So, I mean, one of the more, I guess, pernicious things about these kind of jobs is that it forces people into this situation of having to make believe. That's the word he uses, that they're doing something, that they're doing anything, and it becomes this elaborate like play, basically, where like the managers and the people, whatever superior people at work, they know that your job is bullshit and that you're not really doing anything, and that you could do all of your duties in like 20 minutes for like the whole week, but yet you still have to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day. So it's just this kind of like,
which I consider a weird flaw in society. Like I've even here in Korea, I've had that experience where like when I was in the EPIC program, we had to do what a lot of people refer to as desk warming.
Mm-hmm.
For no reason. Like, you'd have so many classes, and it's fine. I didn't mind doing it because I've had shit jobs where I just constantly had to be doing something grueling. But some people really hated it because, like, it would be like in between classes, you'd have all this break time where maybe you use some of it for lesson planning, but you don't need that much time. Then you'd have hours of just sitting and doing nothing, which drives some people insane. I personally like it, but I understand why it drives other people insane.
Yeah. And I mean, to kind of jump around a little bit here, he gets into, I believe it's in chapter 4, the rare ways when people can take their bullshit job and use it to be creative. And he talks about people like writing a novel, or like working, or like working on a script, or one of the examples was really weird. It was interesting. It was this woman who was like practicing playing like classical Indian music in her head.
Yeah, I remember that.
She even like started like explaining it to other people to help them get through like the horrible tedium of like unnecessary boring office meetings. She's like, if you listen carefully, you can turn like their jibber jabbering into like freestyle rap or something like that. Or like the ticking of the clock is like the perfect metronome, and like anyway,
this goes without saying, but there are a lot of bullshit jobs. But the real bullshit thing is a lot of jobs just have so much downtime, but no one wants to admit it because everyone feels like they need to be working 40-hour weeks because that's the standard. So the real fucking menace in the world is that we've like confined ourselves to this 40-hour-a-week system, where people have to pretend that they're being busy, even if they're not. And no one can tell each other. It's like, oh, no, I don't actually do anything at work. I'm always really busy. There's so much stuff on my schedule. When we could just, like be enjoying ourselves and being like, okay, look, we do this work. Maybe just not pay hourly. Just give everyone a fucking living wage. I don't know. How do you restructure society to do that at this point, though? Seems fucking impossible. Even though I'd like for it to happen.
That's a good point, because I mean, a big part of what I think Graeber is getting at too is that we could easily, I think he references, I'm sure he believes this about the world at large, but I think in certain countries right now at the moment, because we should also mention this book is not that old. I think it was 2018 it was published, or was it?
Yeah, something like that.
But the essay was 2013 in any case, which was called On the Phenomenon of Bullshit Jobs. But he talks about John Maynard Keynes' prediction in 1930 that, now I'm just quoting from the book, he predicted that by the century's end, technology would have advanced sufficiently that countries like Great Britain or the United States would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we are quite capable of this, and yet it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us all work more. God, that's depressing. In order to achieve this, jobs have had to be created that are effectively pointless. Huge swaths of people in Europe and North America in particular spend their entire working lives performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. The moral and spiritual damage that comes from this situation is profound. It is a scar across our collective soul. Yet virtually no one talks about it. Why did Keynes promise utopia, still being eagerly awaited in the 60s, never materialize? The standard line today is that he didn't figure in the massive increase in consumerism. Given the choice between less hours and more toys and pleasures, we've collectively chosen the latter. This presents a nice morality tale, but even a moment's reflection shows it can't really be true. Yes, we have witnessed the creation of an endless variety of new jobs and industries since the 20s, but very few have anything to do with the production and distribution of sushi, iPhones, or fancy sneakers. So what are these new jobs precisely? A recent report comparing employment in the U.S. between 1910 and 2000 gives us a clear picture. Over the course of the last century, the number of workers employed as domestic servants in industry and in the farm sector has collapsed dramatically. At the same time, quote, professional, managerial, clerical, sales, and service workers tripled, growing from 1/4 to 3/4 of total employment. In other words, productive jobs have, just as predicted, been largely automated away. He goes on and on here. I mean, I know I just read a lot, but he sums it up really well in this long quote. Sorry, just indulge me for like one more minute.
Yeah, no problem.
If you count industrial workers globally, including the toiling masses in India and China, such workers are still not nearly so large a percentage of the world population as they used to be. But rather than allowing a massive reduction of working hours to free the world's population to pursue their own projects, pleasures, visions, and ideas, we have seen the ballooning not even so much of the service sector as of the administrative sector, up to and including the creation of whole new industries like financial services or telemarketing, or the unprecedented expansion of sectors like corporate law, academic and health administration, human resources, and public relations. And these numbers do not even reflect all those people whose job is to provide administrative, technical, or security support for these industries, or for that matter, the whole host of ancillary industries, dog washers, all-night pizza delivery men, that only exist because everyone else is spending so much of their time working in all the other ones. These are what I propose to call bullshit jobs. Okay. It's interesting how bullshit begets more bullshit there, and in the end, like we need all-night pizza delivery guys and dog washers because people are doing these pointless bullshit jobs. So it's just like more bullshit jobs, or I guess those might
More
be
shit
considered
jobs.
Yeah, those would be considered shit jobs, but I mean, there's sometimes there's a fine line between what he calls bullshit job and shit job, because like, I mean, he does refine the definition pretty well, but like and he also talks about how it is ultimately subjective. It's like a subjective analysis.
Yeah, I think what happens in a lot of these jobs is that I think like it'll end up like maybe 99% of the job is bullshit, but there is like that one day a year where there might actually be something the employee does that's meaningful. I don't know.
Well, it like in his definition, it has to come down to what the employee thinks, because he also later talks about like people that have bullshit jobs who don't realize they have bullshit jobs. But like part of the definition, like I read in the beginning, was that like the worker has to be like self-aware of the pointlessness of the job to make it a bullshit job. anyway, we can get in more of that kind of hair splitting later.
There's nothing worse than someone who has a pointless job that doesn't realize it's pointless, especially when they're holding power over you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is like a lot of times while I was reading this, I had to keep reminding myself that because you're sort of implicitly supposed to like feel sort of like bad for a lot of these people when they describe their like working conditions. But then I remember like reading Nickel and Dimed and like
It's
how
weird. I don't. Oh, I was going to say I didn't feel bad for them at all.
I mean, I just feel like you naturally are sort of like you want to take their side because it's like, oh, this is the guy, this is the person that Graeber's referencing, and they do talk about like they talk candidly about the problems of it, but I had to keep kind of reminding myself like these people are not really they're suffering, but they're like sort of psychological, spiritual suffering. Any person with a shit job would gladly take that. And David Graeber mentions that like right off the bat somewhere in the first chapter. So I just want to like emphasize that to the listeners right now is that David Graeber is I mean, I guess we should also mention I don't know too much about it, the particulars of his politics, but he's often I mean, he's an anarchist of some sort. I don't know exactly which sort, but that's how he's like, you know, that's like in his bio or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's also his profession is an anthropologist. So he does approach this as an anthropologist, but he also has a really engaging way of writing. So it's not, and you know, he does marshal like some facts and figures here and there, but it's not like super dry or academic. Like it's very engaging to like the non-anthropologist or whatever sort of layman. But at least that's how I felt about it. I mean, I feel like we've kind of summed up what the first chapter's about, right? And the premise.
I think so. So in the second chapter, where he starts to really define the sorts of bullshit jobs. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that the part about so there's also just like titled sections within each chapter, and I think there's hitmen, hairdressers, and the service industry.
Yeah, that's where he gets into the long talk about Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Which I love. Some of my favorite books ever written.
He talks about how being a hitman
is not a bullshit
job. Not a bullshit job. And
because you're performing a task.
And he says even if the hitman thinks their job is harmful to society on the whole, they don't have to pretend otherwise, because obviously what they do is like illegal, and like who are they going to pretend for? I mean, I guess maybe they got to pretend for their clients who hire them out or something, but anyway, but yeah, he also just talks about how like, so in like Douglas Adams was it Hitchhiker's Guide?
Yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide
he references hairdressers as having like pointless bullshit jobs, and David Graeber goes on to show how they're not. I mean, like they provide like a useful.
They perform a service people want, and that service makes people happy. That service is something people want to pay for, so people don't want to do themselves. So it's not bullshit,
right? And again, the huge distinction to at least I always had to keep in mind while reading this was there are many shit jobs. Probably far more shit jobs exist than bullshit jobs. And a shit job is just that. It's a really shitty job, but it still has a purpose. It like even if it's a bad purpose, even if it's like a negative for society or brings the worker like only stress, like it still serves more of a function, no matter what that function is, like morally or whatever. And that's not the kind of job he's focused on in the book, obviously. But sorry, go on. Chapter 2. This is where we get into the 5 different types of bullshit jobs.
Yeah, I've been a goon before. So the 5 types of jobs are flunkies, goons, duct tapers, box tickers, and taskmasters. I've definitely been a goon before as a telemarketer, which is literally one of the worst jobs I've ever had. It destroyed me spiritually. Cold calling. I was cold calling. Oh, sorry.
What's Graeber's definition of goon first before you get into your example?
Okay. Goons are people whose job have an aggressive element, but crucially who exist only because other people employ them, such as lobbyists, PR specialists, telemarketers, and corporate lawyers. So, like, my telemarketing job felt entirely pointless. First off, I was very bad at it, which kind of makes it pointless, but they would hire anyone. And cold calling people to try to sell them timeshare condos in, Orlando was, just a pointless endeavor. To me. Maybe it wasn't for the company. But I literally only took the job and worked at it because, I knew they would pay me for a few weeks until they realized I couldn't do the job or wouldn't do the job.
And I think one of the other criteria of a bullshit job is knowing that to successfully perform your job, you have to like just outright manipulate and lie to people.
That was part of selling the timeshares because they were a bad deal, like a terrible deal. They actually just put people into a hellish amount of debt where they just, not debt, but they kind of just like contracted you out to pay a ton of money every year for where it would just be cheaper if you were going on vacation to rent a hotel or whatever.
Yeah, he writes that goons tend to dislike their jobs because they feel they're actively harmful, which by itself, that wouldn't make it a bullshit job. But he goes on to say that those type of jobs you listed, the lobbyists, telemarketers, PR people, corporate lawyers, they're the kind of jobs that would, he says, probably not be necessary if other companies didn't have them first, which is an interesting way to think about it. So it just becomes this like endless cycle of like having to stay in competition with other companies, I guess.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the things was like, I think one of the anecdotes, the person says like they could imagine going to work and seeing that their entire work building had vanished and they would feel like nothing had been lost. That's kind of like one way to judge a job to be a bullshit
I definitely felt
job.
that way about Fairfield Resorts when I worked for them. I guess that's the closest thing to a bullshit job I've had. I mean, maybe it's not bullshit to, I guess, the corporation because we were selling something and we were making the money. It's just we were selling a bad product that was a bad deal.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at earlier about the like sometimes it is hard to and Graeber talks about this to like scientifically quantify like what is a bullshit job. Like he admits a lot of it does come down to like a subjective judgment by the person doing the job in a way. But that's fine because he's still talking about like a widespread phenomenon. And I mean, the reason he realized this was a widespread phenomenon again was when he wrote that essay in Strike magazine, which is not like a huge magazine, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if I've ever seen it, to be honest. But just like the outpouring of people being like he hit upon something that is a very real phenomenon, basically. And yeah, it's just shown in all of the sort of testimony, and he uses a lot of it in the book so far too. So those are, I guess, the goon bullshit jobs. He also includes like advertising and well, I already said PR. He references Adbusters too, the magazine Adbusters. Apparently that was made by people that were already like in the advertising field, which I didn't quite realize.
Yeah, I had known that because some podcast I listened to had an episode about Adbusters, and suddenly I don't remember which one it was because I listened to too many podcasts at one point in my life, but it was one of those leftist podcasts that's not us.
Maybe it was us. No, it wasn't. Yeah, he's basically, his point is just like some advertising people hate their jobs so much that they actually made a magazine showing what bullshit the advertising world is, or to criticize their own work. But then we move on to the next. It's the duct tapers. The book's basic definition is duct tapers are employees whose jobs exist only because of a glitch or fault in the organization, who are there to solve a problem that ought not to exist. You said you've had jobs like this?
I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I did some IT work where like there wasn't much to do ever, but then like occasionally we'd have to do something, and then that felt useful. I think this might be different. Like, this is one of the ones where I had problems being like, is this bullshit, or is just the fact that they have to come in to work the bullshit part?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why he does distinguish jobs that have like some bullshit elements, but he wouldn't classify them as through and through bullshit jobs. I had one of those, but it's in another category, so I'll wait to describe it. But yeah, I mean these sound like so okay. Here's some more of the description. There will always be some flaws in systems, so there will always be a necessary amount of duct taping required to keep an organization running smoothly. Similarly, a builder will sometimes have to interpret an architect's design to make it actually function as a building. But the duct taper truly has a bullshit job when their entire job consists of problems caused by sloppy or incompetent supervisors, or when the job could easily be automated. That's another big part of this book, which, you know, in that long quote I read, got at that as well. This idea of like automation, and how, you know, Keynes was predicting that, you know, by like the year 2000, things would be so automated that everyone could work 15 hours a week or something. But like, so many of these bullshit jobs, a lot of these people describe, if they even work at all throughout the week, like honestly, they're talking about like completing their entire task for the week in like 15 or 20 minutes, maybe an hour.
Some of the bullshit work, like the things that could be easily automated, is like when bosses are like, you need to do all these reports about what you did for the day, where you can't say I did nothing, and you have to come up with like, well, what did I do for the day?
Right. I remember one description. I won't be able to find it now, but where they had. Well, he described like, because he was so bored, he purposely like manually like went through every single file to like rename it. And it was like thousands of computer files, and he could have just easily automated it to be done in like, you know, 2 minutes. But yeah, I don't know if that would, I mean, I don't even know where that would fall in the 5 different ones, but, so I guess, I mean, we get the point of what the duct tapers are.
What are box tickers?
Box tickers. I feel like there's a lot of these jobs. I think a lot of the.
You were kind of a box ticker, right? At your mental health specialist job?
Yeah, this is the closest thing I've ever had to a bullshit job, but it was just it was one part of my job. But so he defines box tickers as employees who exist only or primarily to allow an organization to be able to claim it is doing something that, in fact, it is not doing. I mean, that is literally the definition of all the paperwork I had to do when I worked at this, like, what do you call it? Not a rehab, really. God damn it! Why can't I think of the word? We'll call it a home for wayward youths. Basically, this place I worked for like about a year. It was one of the worst jobs I ever had, and only partially because of the bullshit element of it. But essentially, it was like mostly a state-funded place where, in the suburbs of Chicago, kids that got into any little amount of trouble, or if like they were wards of the state because their parents fucked up in some way, they would just get sent to places like this.
Yeah.
And a lot of them tended to be like pretty troubled, whatever. Some of them had genuine like mental health issues and they shouldn't have been in a place like that. It was just a huge mess. But anyway, I worked in a place like that, and this huge part of the job was what was referred to as billing. Got to get the billing done, man. Don't fall behind on your billing. Billing just meant you were supposed to fill out these forms. I forget what our quota was per day. But the thing was, is the job was so stressful. I mean, we had to do like, you know, these really intense like physical restraints of like, and these weren't kids. These were like teenagers who were basically like grown adults.
Yeah.
And sometimes shit would just get out of control, like really crazy. But anyway, the job was really stressful, even when that stuff wasn't happening. Just, we were glorified like prison guards, honestly, for the most part, even though my title was mental health specialist, which always makes me laugh. But yeah, the billing was fill out these reports that show like some kind of interaction you had with one of the kids. And usually you had the same basic type of interaction with the kids every day. So, but you weren't allowed to just write the same thing every day. So in other words, we were forced through like the nature of the whole thing to just make up bullshit, which we all resented. And everyone knew that's what we were doing, including our superiors.
And that was to get funding, basically.
It was
right?
it was to make sure we could continue to get like federal funding. And it was such bullshit because I almost guarantee no one was even reading those things when it got to up to that federal level.
Well, yeah, but they need some type of paper to, you know, approve the funding, even if they don't read it. I don't
Yeah,
think they
without
read
the
it
paper,
either.
how could they see that anything is going on? without all of our lies on paper, how could they
know
justify?
there's kids who need places to stay because they don't have anywhere else to stay?
Yeah, got to see it on that paperwork. So it was just like intensely stupid bureaucratic shit that we all hated. And like I knew some guys who like basically figured out like an automated way to do it on their computers. I wrote mine, like some people just wrote them by hand. But then the other problem with it was like some guys would be like, they'd be like the single guy like watching like 20 kids in this back hallway area. And they'd just be sitting there, like, writing out by hand, like, these bullshit stories of what happened that day. And, like, not paying attention to what the kids were doing.
That sounds right.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would say probably my last 6 months, because it stressed me out, too. Because it was just piling up, like, all this backlogged paperwork that I didn't do. But, yeah, I mean, I just stopped doing it and somehow didn't get in trouble. But Yeah, I was like going through my mind with all the shit jobs I've had in my life, which is like the majority of them probably. And I couldn't think of any part of them that counted as bullshit until I remembered that that big paperwork part of that job. So
this is an aside, but when I worked at Citibank, I kind of turned it into a bullshit job. But that was more of like, I was doing customer service, and I hated it. I don't know. It was just a weird place to work where people got in debt with credit cards, and we told them to go screw themselves because, well, it's your fault for spending money with our credit cards. But my last 2 months there, I would just go and clock in and then leave my desk and go to my car and drive away, eat Mexican food or something, hang out with friends, get drunk. Then I'd drive back to work and clock out. It took them 2 months to realize that I was just coming in, clocking in, and coming back to clock out before they fired me. Eventually they fired me. I thought that maybe I could do it forever, which would have been amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me of one of my favorite testimonials in this book too, where this guy was the guy in Spain.
Yeah, he was like an engineer or something. I know the guy you're talking about.
He worked
too.
for like the public, like waterworks or something, and like his job was it was just such a minor sort of cog in the bureaucratic machinery that he just stopped coming into work and nobody noticed for
his
6
psychiatrist
years.
told him it'd be okay.
Oh yeah, his psychiatrist or psychologist, said actually encouraged them to do that because they were just hating their life so much because they would just like sit at a desk for like 8 hours a day, like sort of trying their best to make believe doing a job that there were no tasks for him to do.
Man, I think the world would be so much better if so a lot of these jobs, like his job, I bet it's a needed function when it does come up.
That guy was there in the capacity of like, if something goes wrong, like if some really rare emergency pops off.
Well, what would be so wrong with, paying people, just paying them to do that and being just upfront with most of the time you're just going to stay home.
Well, yeah, I mean that gets into the big why of like, why do these bullshit jobs exist? And Graeber gives a few reasons. And I mean, one of them is just like, it gives some sort of air of legitimacy to the corporation to have tons of employees. Because you would think like, doesn't this counter like the logic of capitalism? Because like they could be cutting all these people. And I think he's going to get, I'm just guessing he's going to get more into that as the book goes on. But he does describe it though as like, it's the same thing of like, why do the goon category, why does the goon category exist? Well, it's because if one industry has goon people, then they all need goon people.
Yeah.
So, like, otherwise, like, what kind of company are you? Like, you need these more or less useless, but somehow useful in a weird sense, I guess, to like, I don't know, like in a very superficial way, useful. And I think he talks about how like it just gives like CEOs and like higher ups, like it feeds into their whatever weird power complexes they might have as well. Maybe also because they know that those people's jobs are like just being held by a thread. So it's like some weird sadistic thing of like how easily you could just like trash like half of your employees' jobs if you really wanted to like make an example out of people.
That's true. So the other two jobs, there's flunkies. Flunkies are pretty simple. These are like yes men. Could also be like secretaries. They're basically jobs who like their function is to make their bosses look better than they are. And often flunkies end up doing the work of their bosses, I think. And lastly, there's taskmasters, everyone's favorite thing, middle management.
I think this category of flunkies is a huge one as well. Like this is kind of what I guess I was just getting at. Like why do these jobs exist? You know, like they could just be cut so easily, and say add that money to the profits. But he gives examples of doormen and like elevator operators and shit. Like receptionists, even though, I mean, sometimes receptionists are useful, but sometimes they're there just as decoration, so that's kind of what he's talking about there, is like it's all just really pure appearance. Like nobody needs a fucking door, man. Like you can open the door yourself.
They're also yes men, secretaries.
Right. Yeah. You said that. So like they
sometimes the flunky does a lot of work, because the thing that's bullshit about it is they end up doing their boss's work.
right.
So their boss gets to do nothing while the flunky takes on all of their tasks but doesn't get paid or respected for it, which is a special kind of bullshit.
Right. Yeah, and he says that's like the prime example is secretaries or administrative assistants. And sorry, you were about to go into masters, middle management types.
Taskmasters tell people what to do or invent extra work. I've had taskmasters. I've actually had taskmasters here in Korea at quite a few jobs. Like the head of the English department at my one elementary school who didn't speak any English, but he had to come up with us all kinds of extra tasks to do when we weren't teaching, just so that we appeared busier, like writing reports or, drawing circles in books.
Yeah, I think, I mean, not that he discounts this, but like he does mostly talk about kind of North America and Europe. But like, my God, Korea is full of bullshit jobs.
Yeah, taskmasters. So
or at least jobs with huge elements of bullshits, like the desk warming thing you were talking about. Like there's this sort of traditional corporate culture thing of like, you can never leave the office before
your boss leaves,
before your superiors leave, particularly like, I guess the main boss. But like, so like they could just like sadistically torture you and like just sit in their office like jerking off till like midnight, and you just have to sit at your desk like wishing you could go home.
I've had friends that very thing has happened to.
Oh, I yeah, for sure.
Foreigners, it doesn't happen to us as much, but like I think that's because they give us some leeway for not being Korean. That's a whole nother thing.
Also, I think they know that a lot of people wouldn't stand for that, and they wouldn't.
I mean,
they wouldn't take the job.
I'm fine with, like, when I was doing desk warming for Epic, I was fine with that, because I've worked plenty of jobs where I was expected to be there for 8 hours. It's fine. It was actually kind of nice that they were upfront that just I had like 4 hours of break time a day. That's cool.
Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, again,
it would have been better.
It's not ideal. It would be better if you could just have less time in the workplace.
It would have been cool if I was allowed to go to my apartment during that, because my apartment was literally across the street from the school I was working at. But no, I wasn't allowed to leave the school. But yeah,
you got to keep up appearances, which is a big part of bullshit jobs.
But taskmasters, like school administration, is actually a great place for taskmasters. And I know this happens in North America too, but it's basically just like the administrators are like, teaching is not enough work on its own, so you need to do these reports and extra paperwork and et cetera, to show that you're really doing stuff, because you're not busy enough just teaching classes. So taskmasters are like people who create extra work for employees who are already doing enough, just because it it's not like improving the jobs. Often I think it makes people work worse. but the taskmasters need to like look like they're doing something to, you know, continue to justify their job.
Yeah, like I said earlier on, it's interesting how the bullshit creates more bullshit. Like he splits taskmasters into two types as well. So the first one, it's only he says that it's only bullshit if the taskmaster knows that the underlings would be doing the work anyway, but yet they're still hounding people, basically. It says they often have to ensure people hit their productivity metrics and send reports up the chain of command. Since this often requires some creative work with numbers, they might actually be able to save the jobs of people who are not being assigned much work. And the second kind of taskmaster, this is bullshit begets bullshit. The second kind is harmful because it makes other bullshit jobs. It usually involves not just the numerical results, like the first type make, or have to get, but a whole range of appraisals, reviews, assessments, and other work that the underlings have to perform. This means that teachers, for instance, have to spend time filling in forms about their work and results instead of being able to focus on their lesson plans and evaluating the work of their students.
I have experienced a lot of this. Like, I remember at my job before my current one, we had to write like detailed reports about all the students to give to their homeroom teachers so that they could incorporate them into their reports, and the homeroom teachers would just throw them away because they didn't want them. Like, but we still had to do them because we also had to send them to management. In fact, most of the homeroom teachers I worked with would be like, "Yeah, don't do that. I'm not going to use it." But the management also had to send it to them, so we had to do it anyways. But it was like literally just like something for us to do.
Right.
Which at the time, I thought it was so dumb. It was just ridiculous to me because I think it's the same thing that maybe you get when you're like in public school and you realize your teacher's just giving you busy work and it pisses you off because you're like, this is just fucking busy work.
Yeah. Except I feel it's like more demoralizing as an adult because you feel like, shouldn't I have outgrown this?
Yeah.
Wasn't this just elementary school or whatever?
I mean, personally, I have sometimes like this weird feeling that maybe it's not busy work because I do think I stunted some of my personal education as a student growing up by thinking some things were busy work that actually weren't busy work. They were just practice that I probably should have done, and I would be better at certain subjects now had I done them. But that's a whole nother thing.
No, but if you have to write reports that you know are getting thrown in the trash, that is like the definition of bullshit.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to finish off, like this is how the second type of taskmaster's job creates more bullshit. Sometimes a worker in a non-bullshit position has tenure but is incompetent. Why do I have a hard time saying that word? A taskmaster may have to invent an entirely new role in the corporation just to hire someone to do the actual non-bullshit work, but in secret. I mean, that's just so fucked up. It makes me laugh.
It's so fucking weird.
That's kind of like that kind of crosses over into flunky, I guess. It's like a lower level person who's doing the upper level person's job for them, but not getting any of the credit.
I imagine there's a lot of flunkies in politics.
Yeah, but I think like the sort of like the bootlickers in politics, you know, like they're all just trying to climb up that ladder, you know. Like, I mean, it's like that in the corporate world too, though. Like they're just these eager people that, you know, he talks about that in the book at some point too, that like some people who can not experience the spiritual violence of the bullshit job are the type of people who approach their bullshit job as a stepping stone.
So one of the examples of Taskmaster in the book was this guy was talking about like having a yard work job of some sort where there was nothing really to do. So his boss was like, well, pick up those stones and just put them all in a stack. I can totally relate to that because the summer right after I graduated high school, way back when, I ended up getting a construction job where like often I did have work to do, but I was like basically like the hand. I was like the fucking like boy who didn't really have experience doing any construction at the time. So like they would just give me all the shit stuff. But if like there was a couple of days where we'd just run out of stuff to do, so I was like basically being a brick mason's assistant, and the brick mason would just be like, well, you need to get stronger, so just move all the bricks from this wheelbarrow to that wheelbarrow and just keep doing it until we go home. That's what I would do.
God. Like,
though that job actually did make me really fit that summer. Like just fucking moving bricks all day because that's all I fucking did.
see, it's tough love, man. This is like so unimaginative too. Like, yeah, that the guy moving the rocks. Like, I think it was like a job on a farm actually, because it was it was like go out into the fields and just find rocks and then pile them up. And the guy described how like everybody knew that like the fields had just been tilled. Like any of the rocks that were there were like not big enough to create a problem, right? So right off the bat, it's an impractical, unnecessary, pointless task. But I think that the description ended with like, well, he described too that he gave it his all. He was like pouring sweat, running around, picking up rocks.
When I was moving bricks, I didn't give it my all.
But then like he had this big pile of rocks, and like he said like that pile of rocks just sat there forever. Like he would like see it like every day at work after that and be reminded of like the bullshit. Also, I didn't finish saying though that guy in Spain who didn't go to work for 6 years but kept getting paid, he used all of his free time to study Spinoza, and he became like a Spinoza expert.
That's
which
awesome.
I found kind of, I don't know, just kind of almost like cute or something.
I've had some jobs with like an inane amount of free time. Like I used to do home health care. I always regret that I don't have the personality to like, just really invest my time into learning something. Makes me, God, I'm just so fucking lazy. Anyway, but I find that like inane amounts of free time at work, and I think Graeber talks about it maybe in the next chapter or the 4th chapter. While you could be like, self-improving because you have the time and stuff, but something about the fact that you're at work and like the culture of it like crushes your soul in a way to where you can't actually work on those pursuits.
Right. I'll just, before we move on to chapter 3, he makes a good point to, it's under the heading of on the common misconception that bullshit jobs are confined largely to the public sector. He goes on to say, so far we've established 3 broad categories of jobs: useful jobs, which may or may not be shit jobs, bullshit jobs, and a small but ugly penumbra of jobs such as gangsters, slumlords, top corporate lawyers, or hedge fund CEOs made up of people who are basically just selfish bastards and don't really pretend to be anything else. He goes on to say, what's significant to me, though, is that nowadays useless bureaucrats seem just as rife in the private sector as in the public sector. He references a previous book of his called The Utopia of Rules. He said something to the effect there of, if you complain about getting some bureaucratic runaround from your bank officials are likely to tell you it's all the fault of government regulations. But if you research where those regulations actually come from, you'll likely discover that most of them were written by the bank. So, in other words, he is this should just be super clear here that he's attacking both the public and private sector, which he rightly also sees as basically having like almost no distinction at this point in history anyway. So, he also identifies something called second order bullshit jobs, which we kind of talked about a little bit, like when the late night pizza delivery guy or dog washers. So it's like, although those don't really count, those are just shit jobs, depending on who you ask. But second order bullshit jobs, some jobs and tasks are not of themselves bullshit, but only exist because of bullshit happening higher up the food chain. Telemarketing offices still have to be cleaned, even though telemarketing is mostly bullshit. Between the real bullshit jobs, the second order bullshit jobs, and the bullshit in non-bullshit jobs, there are a lot of wasted hours. If we cut all of those out, we could probably get down to a 15-hour work week and still get every worthwhile task done. So yeah, chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 and chapter 4, he's basically focusing on like what is damaging about a bullshit job to the individual. He doesn't necessarily, I don't think, get into the wider social implications, which I'm guessing he gets into later. But I don't know. Do you want to talk about chapter 3 a little bit?
No, but I guess I will. Sorry.
So I mean, it's on spiritual violence part 1, and then chapter 4 is part 2. But
yeah, this is where he starts to get into like why people with bullshit jobs are unhappy. Because like I know that I've made it clear a few times on the podcast so far that I wouldn't mind having one of these bullshit jobs. But I also understand how they can make people unhappy, because I have had jobs where with inane free time, even if it was like a job that like I felt like was doing something good, but sometimes free time can just make you unhappy, especially if you feel like pressured not to actually like do what you would normally do in your free time. Like, take a nap, because you can't do that, even though you know that if you took a nap during your free time at work, that when you were actually doing work, you would be better at your job. Maybe that's not the best example. So, spiritual violence. One might imagine that those being paid to do nothing would consider themselves fortunate.
Yeah, and Graeber is totally sympathetic to the idea that like who wouldn't want this? It goes against what does he say? It goes against like sort of basic economic theory about this, which uses like a theoretical human being, Homo economicus.
Sorry, I don't know why that.
Are you laughing because I said homo?
No, I'm laughing at economicus.
Okay.
Actually, that's the part that made me laugh.
But he talks about how this is flawed, though. Like classical economics is just flawed because it assumes every human is motivated by a calculus of all costs and benefits. So, but the fact that people are like extremely miserable with these jobs that you'd think they'd feel like, oh, I hit the jackpot. Like I can like sit around and watch YouTube all day, and get paid pretty handsomely at this bullshit job.
A lot of people want to feel meaningful, and we're taught from an early age that our work is what gives us meaning. The reason I think I would not so much mind one of these jobs is because I've never found much meaning from work. In fact, I hate that I have to do it. I find meaning from other things. But I get that like a lot of people are just like programmed to find meaning from work. I think they should break free of that programming personally, but I understand that it's hard.
Yeah, I agree. Although like when you think about it too, it's like even the people with the bullshit job, with the exception of, the kind of like the guy in Spain who just stayed at home and still managed to get paid. I mean, he is one of the
he's a hero.
Rarities, but he really is.
I wish he was my grandpappy.
I wish I was him.
Me too.
I'd be a Spinoza scholar by now. So like the theory goes that and it fits with like our intuitions that humans have to be compelled to work, and that if humans are offered the choice to be parasites, they'll take it. But the results of like psychological research and the research that David Graeber did, and like analyzing all this anecdotal evidence from people, seems to say otherwise.
Yeah, this classical theory is like a lot of people who are against welfare always bring up. They're like, oh, if we give them like state benefits, why would anyone work? The thing is, people like to work. I mean, I'm talking about how I don't like to work, because I don't. But there is some work I like to do. It's just like,
I mean, the
like
thing
I
is,
like doing this. I like talking to you, and I guess at least maybe someone likes to listen to us. Question that, but sure. This is is this meaningful work? Maybe we provide information that we find interesting and hope other people find interesting.
Yeah, like whenever I hear like in movies or whatever, like people say that like, what is it? Like if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I'm always like, fuck off. That's so much easier said than done. Like most people can't do that.
So like, you play music, and I assume that you love music to some degree, but I imagine it's also taken a lot of work to actually, be good at playing music, right?
Yeah.
It's always been fun. I don't know where I'm going with that, but
well, I mean, like, but I mean, that's the thing is like, you're essentially like I very easily tossed away the idea of like, I'm ever going to be able to like make a living off of music, because I don't know, society tells me that it's like, you've got a 1 in a million chance of that happening, which is not even necessarily true, because I mean, there are like non-famous working musicians, but like,
yeah, I have like a good friend in Nashville who's a studio musician now. He's not famous, but he's worked on a ton of shit.
Right. But or even like podcasting, like obviously like it would be awesome if this was our job.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
But anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. Lost in reverie. But
I think most. Oh, I was just going to say one last thing. I think the reason most people don't choose to be parasites is because people want to do meaningful things. They want recognition from their peers. They want to do something.
Yeah, most people don't actually want to just like get high and watch TV until they die. Like, regardless of what some people might even think that they want, I think I mean, it's really just like that, most people don't want to put on the fucking Infinite Jest cartridge, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So yeah, people want to feel, human beings seek out meaning in all kinds of ways. And unfortunately, like, because we're told that we have to spend like a third of our lives or whatever, probably more than that, like doing something called work, which is also like mostly taught to, I don't know, at least our generation and onward, I'm sure, and before as well, but that it's not meant to be fun. Like, yeah, sure, you should try to get a good job that you like, but I mean, hell, most people can't, so just be prepared to suffer for like the majority of the rest of your life.
Exactly.
And also, you'll be lucky if you get those Social Security checks, you fucking parasite.
And people believe that, and I think the reason that they find themselves unhappy if they happen to land one of these bullshit jobs is because a lot of these bullshit jobs actually seem to be the jobs where you need like higher education or master's degrees, etc., to even be considered for them. Then you get into it thinking maybe you've studied this field and you really do like your field, and you get into the job to realize that you do nothing. That has to. I could get how that feels morally like crushing. To be like, I want to do this, but I'm doing nothing.
Yeah. And I mean, he gives several reasons why it creates like depression and anxiety and despair in people to have these kind of jobs, and that's one of them. It's just like it's sort of the chasm between their expectations and reality. But I think that one of the bigger things is the elaborate game of pretending to be doing work while knowing that your boss very well knows that you're not doing any work, and they also have to in turn pretend to not know that you're not doing any work. And it's just like this elaborate, I think he calls it kabuki theater at one point. Like, it's just this ridiculous, it is sort of like piles a new level of pointlessness on top of what's already pointless. And it's like weirdly like psychologically draining to do that day in and day out. Which see this is the way I'm like talking about it now. This is like in the book where I had to stop and remind myself, like, regardless, this is still a million times better than digging ditches or working in a fast food restaurant or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean,
one of my favorite.
Graeber's not comparing the two things anyway. Like he knows that shit jobs are on the whole worse to have,
yeah.
And that every person with a shit job would take a bullshit job instantly.
The thing about shit jobs I wish they just paid more, because
well, yeah, it should be the inverse. The bullshit job should be getting $7.25 an hour, and the shit job should be making, whatever, like $100,000 a year.
One of my all-time favorite jobs was actually a fast food restaurant. As funny as that sounds, no.
But the problem with it is, no, I mean, I can see how it could not be. The part of those jobs that is crushing is that you put all of this sort of time and sweat into it, and then you get $7.25 an hour.
Exactly.
And then you're in a constant state of anxiety and stress over like meeting your like bare minimum necessities. So also, okay, this part is important, I think, too, which ties into what we were just talking about, like how deep bullshit jobs just breed like resentment within the working class. I mean, if we can even consider people that make decent money in bullshit jobs to be working class in this sense of like they're not in the management or elite class or whatever, or the CEO class. But like, yeah, it makes people with shit jobs just really resent the whole scenario. But it also makes people with the shit jobs who have any like sort of moral sense like hate themselves and feel like they're like, so many of the testimonies are like people saying like, this is fraudulent, I don't deserve this money, like, this is utterly unfair to like society as a whole. But yeah, then it also like it's that kind of like infighting and division that keeps people from like looking at the root of the problem, which is it's not the floor worker in the Amazon warehouse shouldn't really be resenting their middle management boss as much as they should be hating Amazon itself, or I don't know, the larger economic system that allows Amazon to exploit the fuck out of everybody.
Yep.
But instead, it's easier to just be like, that motherfucker gets paid 10 times more than me, and like, I think it's very much like purposely designed to keep people feeling resentful towards each other, and like also like in this sort of dog eat dog mentality, which partially just benefits people way higher up on the food chain, so to speak. And so chapter 4, he just kind of continues to show all of the
types of spiritual violence.
Yeah, the spiritual violence.
I think chapter 4 is where he goes into more like examples of like
there were a lot of interesting examples, and I planned on reading them, but I know we're probably running out of time now, so
we can talk about some of them. So like,
If you have some like ready to go in mind, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm looking at one right now about this guy who he worked for a post-production company, and like his whole job was to basically airbrush like models to look perfect in like advertisements and commercials and shit. And he talks about like I don't know, just how kind of damaging that kind of job really is to society. That's just one that I'm like scrolling through here.
yeah, there was like one of the things, the sections was on the social, mental, and physical result of a lack of purpose. And I think this is where he talks about the guy that works for Sega, and then he went to another gaming company too.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
And basically, I think this guy really did want to, like, make video games or be part of making video games. But his job was just, he had no job. Like, he was hired. And they gave him a desk. And when he asked about tasks, they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, we don't really have anything for you to do.
It was like, because his job, if I'm remembering right, his job description was so narrow that like once every 6 months he might have like a memo to write up or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a funny part to that. I mean, it's fucked up, but it's kind of funny. Do you remember like what happens?
Yeah, he eventually quit his job because like he did get like a task to like I think write the like manual for like the sound design of the game, which
Right.
the sound team's supposed to do, but his manager fucked up by giving him the task. Then the manager asked him to take the blame for it, even though it was the manager's fuck up. And he wasn't going to, but then his programming buddies are like, we really like having a manager who doesn't know what they're doing because it allows us to do whatever we want to. Will you please take the blame for us? And he did. So he just ended up like quitting the day after. Is that the funny part you were going to talk about, or?
Well, yeah, just that like he was so excited to finally get a real task.
Yeah.
So he said that he like put all his whole fucking like soul into it, like writing up this thing that wasn't even actually like super important or even what he signed up for, but he was just so like
So
desperate
like happy
to do anything.
to be doing something.
And then after all of that, the second floor, like the floor beneath the floor he worked on, were all like enraged that he did their job for them by accident.
Yeah.
And yeah, you explained the rest. Like he ends up like taking the fall for his shitty manager because all the other employees are like, we love that shitty manager. He lets us do nothing.
Well, I think that like even the other employees, maybe the programmers, were happy with the shitty manager because they were able to make maybe the game they wanted to make instead of having like a slave driver being like, you got to do this because this is the way to make more profits. I don't know. I could be wrong about that. It doesn't matter. But yeah,
I just remembered something early on in the book and it goes to that example you've brought up a few times of like, well, it's not even, it's actually, well, it's not exactly the same, but you talked about like the person dying on the job at Amazon and how they just like kept the body there.
Yeah.
Like on the floor. He talks about, he actually references David Foster Wallace's like unfinished last novel, The Pale King, which has a part in it where this guy working at the IRS
Dies
is
at
like
his desk.
dead for several days, like sitting in his chair at his desk before anyone notices. But then he brings up like an actual real life example of that happening. But it was like a guy like in his office. It wasn't quite as insane as the example in the book, but I don't know. When I saw that, I was kind of like, Graeber reads The Pale King. That's cool.
That's cool. So some other spiritual violence. There's on the guilt of feeling miserable. This is something we've talked about kind of all through this episode, but that's the one where you like have a job where you realize that your job is meaningless. And you realize you shouldn't feel bad about it because you're getting paid, but you do feel bad because you're not like contributing anything meaningful to the world. I think this is actually a lot of jobs. Like a good friend in America got into accounting because like he wanted to make money, and he feels like his job's completely meaningless. But he does make more money than just about any of my other friends. But if I ever talk to him, he's like, I hate my job. It's so depressing. People don't need us.
It's also, yeah, I think that's a big part of these bullshit jobs as well. At least for the Because the thing is a lot of the people that he, at least so far, I think all the interviews he's published bits of, or whatever, like emails that he received and stuff, they've been from like thoughtful, more or less like seemingly like pretty morally centered people. But he does mention sort of later on that like there are probably tons of people with bullshit jobs that are more than happy to have bullshit jobs, even if, even knowing that they're harmful and knowing that it's unfair, like, and they don't feel any guilt about it. But I guess those are what you'd call sociopaths. So,
yeah, I think when I'm thinking of my friend Greg, that one of the other like parts of spiritual violence is on knowing that one is doing harm. I think where he worked for Goldman Sachs, and I think that he fell into that one a lot, where he doesn't work for Goldman Sachs anymore. Actually, I think he likes his job now. He ended up going back and getting his master's, and now he's working as a professor. But before that, I know that like when he was working at Goldman Sachs, that he was incredibly depressed and like hated everything except for his paycheck. I think he liked his paycheck.
Graeber used to, probably more than one example. I just remembered one where it was a guy who was, like at peak misery with his bullshit job, and like he basically he just quit and became like a science teacher like at high school and was like a million times happier. But then again, I had to think when I read that, well, yeah, sure, guy, because you like have a huge bloated savings account, and yeah, now you can be a high school teacher as like a hobby. But like at the same time,
I mean, Canadian, if I remember the example, teachers make pretty decent money in Canada.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Like if you got paid a shit ton of money to do nothing.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I still, kudos for you, like quitting and doing something more like socially, whatever, beneficial. But at the same time, I had to kind of remind myself, like, this guy walked out of that job like totally rich. It's not like he's a normal high school because like a high school teacher, but then I guess that's what your point about being in Canada is that it's not like in America where teachers are basically like spat upon and looked down on as lower than dirt in some ways, at least in action, if not words.
Yeah.
But the thing about the guilt of feeling miserable, I think he really kind of like interestingly ties into something he called rights scolding, where it's kind of like this whole idea of like, millennials just want something for nothing, type of shit. How does he put it? Like, yeah, there's a phenomenon called rights scolding where people are criticized for expecting to be treated well when others are treated worse. This is very clear in the general media commentary on younger people wanting state welfare by those who grew up with such state welfare. So this is Biden saying, I have no empathy for millennials, essentially.
Yeah.
What, they want handouts? They think they have it so bad? I could have almost been in Vietnam, but I somehow dodged the draft. Fucking piece of shit.
Miraculously.
Wouldn't be an episode without me at least getting one piece of shit in at Biden. And Trump too. Actually, I just heard Trump give a speech recently, and it kind of gave me the fucking
Was it the one in Alabama
howling
where he got
fantods. Huh?
Was it the one in Alabama where he got booed for telling the crowd to get vaccinated?
Oh, see, I didn't hear that part, but I think that was what the speech was from. It weirdly just automatically came up on my YouTube queue after like some other video, and I kept listening to it because I was like washing the dishes. I don't know. And I realized like I never really listened to like more than like a news clip of Trump anyway, but he was just like up to his old fucking just demonizing immigrants shenanigans, and everything he said was a lie. Like every single word was like, yeah, Biden's letting in all the immigrants.
He sucks.
Anyway,
they all suck.
That'll probably be for the next episode where I think we'll get back to
talking to the news.
What's wrong with everything right now in the world?
So, I guess the way he closes out chapter 4 or the chapter 3 and 4, I almost consider like one chapter because it's all about just like the spiritual violence of these jobs and how they like, corrupt the spirit. But he closes it out talking about like spiritual resistance. And this is something I've brought up a couple of times, but one of the things he talks about is how you would think people would like try to pick up new skills during their free time or, improve themselves some ways, but like the ennui of their work keeps them from doing that. So they find the mental strain just like drives them to like look at social media or, endlessly scroll through Reddit or whatever. I've done that before.
Yeah, because it's passive entertainment. You don't have to really use your brain, which is totally understandable. I mean, whenever I had sort of free time at the very few like kind of like sitting in an office type jobs I ever had, which I guess was really only the private detective one. I wasn't like, well, the other thing is I couldn't have gotten away with like working on a novel, but I could get away with like sneakily like looking at like forums or whatever and shit like that. But yeah, I mean, he does sort of try to show some positive things, which I guess I already mentioned. Like he talks about people like working on their art in all of this free time that they have. But like, as you mentioned, like, I think he even says that, he thinks like the huge sort of uptick and surge in social media is like in part largely due to these kind of jobs, because people just spend literally 7.5 hours of their workday when they have a particularly bullshit job just looking at Twitter.
Yeah, some people even think Twitter is their job.
For some people, it is their job.
That's
I'm pretty
true.
sure
It is, yeah.
Quite literally.
It is quite.
I mean, isn't that like half of your girlfriend's job?
It's a big half of my girlfriend's job. Her job is YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. But she also has articles in magazines occasionally.
No, I
her
know.
Her job is social media.
But I mean that is like a standard job in like the modern corporation is like you're on Twitter duty basically. Yeah, so he ends on a sort of mildly positive, but then also like just kind of crashes it down to reality. And then like yeah, sure, people might be working on their screenplays, but mostly people are just like mentally jacking off on Twitter and Facebook. But and that's basically where we'll leave it. I mean, we left out a lot of the testimonies, which I don't know, they're interesting, but I would just suggest read the book to get the fuller picture.
Yeah, it's definitely worth reading. And this is just us summarizing and talking about it, discussing it.
Yeah,
giving our own testimonies, so to speak.
But yeah, I think we got through all the major points.
Yeah.
Should we do a quick recommendation?
Sure. I have a recommendation. My recommendation is actually kind of a silly website that I was playing around with like a lot this morning called Nestflix, which
Nest.
N-E-S-T, like Nest, Flix, so like Netflix, but Nestflix. But what it is, it's a fake streaming website where they take all the like shows and movies inside like shows and have them all laid out, like say like shows that have been showed on the Simpsons, or shows that were like in an episode of Friends or whatever, and just laid it out as a streaming service with like the banners and backdrops and like the nesting of where they came from in these other TV shows. And it's just kind of fun to play around with, especially for someone like me who's like watched way too much TV in their life, and like just like looking at it like, oh yeah, I remember that from Scrubs or from whatever dumb show I've watched.
That sounds like a good website for anyone out there with a bullshit job.
Yeah.
Nice. Topically or thematically relevant, I should say. Okay, I'll recommend this 12-part documentary called The Untold History of the United States. It's Oliver Stone. It came out like 2012, I guess. Yeah. And it's a history of the 20th century, basically 20th century until like 2012, basically, like till Obama. And I don't know. I'm always a bit skeptical of Oliver Stone, but I feel like this is the most like, I mean, obviously because it's documentary, you know, it's not one of his like narrative films. It's a little more historically informed, also because he had the help of, I guess, a pretty well-renowned historian, Peter Kuznick. And I think it either started off as a book or they wrote the book after they made the documentary. But it's like a huge book that's almost like 1,000 pages, I think, now, because they added like another 150 to like include stuff about, I think, Trump and so on. But it's just, regardless of how, you know, whatever you think of like Oliver Stone's like political takes on the whole, it's just interesting to watch the 20th century go by. And I think he does get into some things that the average person is not aware of. And he focuses a lot on dropping the atomic bomb. And one of the things I really especially liked about it is that he focuses on Henry Wallace, probably the most like socialist guy in the government, like next. Well, I mean, Eugene Debs never made it into the government, but like he was like almost. I think he was like basically almost like on a Eugene Debs level, but anyway, he goes into the important. It will really remind you of how Bernie got fucked over in the primaries in 2016. The way they fucked over Henry Wallace in 44, I want to say. He was FDR's vice president in FDR's last go around. But anyway, yeah, it covers all the major, you know, points in history, I guess. A lot of just about American imperialism around the globe. And one thing I found most interesting, because I was like, part of the reason I almost wanted to rewatch it, because I've seen it before, was the part when he gets to the part about Kennedy, and he still does a little bit too much worship, like hero worship Kennedy, but he's way more like even-handed about Kennedy than he is in, say, the movie JFK, or maybe the way he talked about Kennedy back in the 90s. But anyway, it's good. It is long, but I don't know. If you're interested in American history, give it a look-see. And that'll do it.
Yeah.
Except for go to heatdeathpod.com. Go to Twitter at heatdeathpod. Keep sending in things.
Like or recommend our podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Write us a review.
And actually, after the last episode, we got a few more like nice messages. But we need more. We need more to read on the podcast. So keep them coming, folks. Let's see. Have you ever had a bullshit job? Have you had a shit job? Now that I'm sure most people have had. Tell us what that was all about. Have you read David Graeber? Do you like David Graeber? Do you hate David Graeber?
Let us know.
Let us know at our email, or it's probably easier just to go to Twitter and DM us, but whatever. Okay, speaking of but whatever, we got to go.
Yep. I'll see you later.
All right, till next time. Bye.
Long-haired preachers come out every night. I try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by, in way up high, working free to live on hay. You get by in the sky when you die, that's a lie. The Starvation Army, they play, and they shout and they clap and they pray. When they got all your coins on the drum, they will tell you when you're on the bum. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky, way up high, working free to live on hay. You'll get by in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Holy rollers and jumpers come out, and they roll and they jump and they shout. Give your money to Jesus, they say, and you'll lead on that glorious day. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky, way up high, working free to live on hay. You get by in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Working folks of all countries unite. Side by side, we for freedom will fight. When this world and its wealth we have gained, to the correctors we'll sing this refrain. You will eat by and by, when you learn how to cook and how to fry. Chop some wood, do you good, and you'll eat in that sweet by and by. That's all right.
The first voice recording was made in 1860. It was a 10-second fragment of the French folk song Au clair de la lune recorded by inventor Edward Leon Scott de Martinville. But who will make the final voice recording and when? What will it be? Who will hear it?